This is the Crucible, the JRTC experience. This is Got Comms. In this series, we discuss signal warfighting skills, lessons learned in a decisive action training environment for large-scale combat operations at JRTC.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Crucible, the JRTC Experience podcast. So I'm Major Dan Plum, here with Ops Group, Plans EMC, call sign Zulu 3. I've been with Ops Group about 2 years, been working on this project now for just over a year and a half. And I'm joined by Captain Bradley and Sergeant First Class LaPlante. Please introduce yourselves.
Captain Princeton Bradley. I've been at JRTC for about 2 years now, call sign Kilo 02 with Task Force 3. Working on this project for about a year and a half. KD assignments before this, I was a Battalion S2 with 270 Armor Battalion and a Division G2 targeting officer.
I'm Sergeant First Class LaPlante, call sign Fox 59. I've been at JRTC almost 4 years now. My KD background, I was a battalion FSNCO with 4-9 infantry out of Fort Carson in the 1st Brigade, 4th ID Brigade FSNCO.
Thanks. Well, we're here today to talk about something we all are emotionally involved in at this point, which is the JRTC Ideal Command Post, which is part of the Army's greater Command Post Survivability program. So as a scene setter of how I got into this, so years ago when General Garrett was still a Force Comm commander, he had an initiative he called the Command Post Huddle. And so about twice a year, he would get together all the various divisions in the Army, and we'd have conversations about command posts. And so I first got interested in command posts at the battalion level as the G5 maneuver planner of the 101st Airborne Division around 2022. On the last iteration of General Garrett's Command Post Huddle. And going into that, his instruction to the force was, hey, let's look at a way to standardize the battalion command post so that they're relatively the same across their various corps. And so in the 101st, we looked at that and we studied the battalion command post, and we came up with what we thought was a very good model. And we brought that into play during the 101st first execution of the Operation Lethal Eagle, or the division training density under then General McGee. And we put it into effect in several battalions, and so I gained an appreciation for the challenge of having a model or a standardization at the battalion level, because the reality is that the command post at the battalion level is a reflection of the battalion commander's personality, how he likes to receive information, what equipment he's got on hand, and a lot of other factors that make the command post more flexible to personality and time, and less able to be standardized. And so I really gained an appreciation for the challenge of coming up with a model and telling people to do it. So flash forward some years working in Task Force 3 at JRTC, coaching battalions out there in the box. Along comes the task through General Gardner and Colonel Hardman, and then our senior Lieutenant Colonel Ben Jackman, to, hey, let's look at a way to create a standardized battalion command post that is ideally suited for large-scale combat operations. And so we took that as a project, and it was nested with the Infantry Warfighting Symposium, and we were tasked to create not only a model, but actually create a prototype to showcase to the Army during the symposium, and we went through how we were going to set it up. We were going to demonstrate, the setup time, the teardown time, the jump, and we were going to do all of that. And so we worked very, very hard and came up with a model. of what we thought was very good. And there were some unique challenges associated with it because we just didn't have the equipment. So what do you guys remember about that?
On that note, sir, I'd just like to say a special thank you to 1509 for letting us borrow so much of their equipment. And I say borrow in the hopes that I think we got most of it back, but...
No, we still have a couple of camo nets and OE254s.
No, that equipment that, yeah, we still have that need to probably go back.
Yeah, but either way, special thank you to Geronimo for helping us out with that. It absolutely would not have come together without their support. But I remember we were down on that airfield in the warehouse, and I think it's the kind of net facility down there, and we're taking our first swing of this thing, and I remember we had all these different tables on the inside of a SICK-up with the 4 Humvees backed into it. Or actually, no, at that time we had 3, with the one being the entrance, because we didn't have something to replicate the command vehicle at that time. And, you know, that kind of first schwack at how we were actually going to put this thing together and integrate the staff and systems, I think it was a good starting point for us. But I'm very much happy to see how that has continued to evolve, not just by our own thought process, but what some of the other units have brought to it as they started to incorporate the idea as well.
I mean, one of the biggest challenges was you can't stake in the concrete.
Yeah.
So we had to jump through hoops to get sandbags and fill the sandbags to make little barriers to hold stuff down. That was a big challenge too.
Yeah, so in those times, I think so Mark 1 of the Ideal Command Post, you know, the beginning, you know, what I remember of that was we had the logic figured out, and you know, now flash forward, we have an incredible model that is already being picked up across the Army. We're starting to see units arrive to JRTC with our model, and our Microsoft Teams room. Ideal Command Post is gaining dozens of followers a day. That's looking at what is now the final product. But in the beginning there, it was fairly rough. But I think we understood at that point that what we needed to do was have a small number of vehicles, standardized vehicles, and I think we chose high back Humvees at that time, that would come together, and then by joining those vehicles together with those people and their systems, that was the command post. It wasn't necessarily a single location. It was when those things were joined, no matter where they were, that was the command post. And so a stark contrast from the legacy command post, where you could point to a tent and say that's the command post. Well, our model was saying no, it's yes, when these vehicles come together, it's the command post, but if they're not together, it's not the command post. And so it's in a state of flux. And so what do we remember about some of the early model and the challenges there?
It's just the layout. When units came here, seeing the layouts of the vehicles, the Humvees or whatever they were using for their command post, the layouts of them, making sure that radios and all that were in a specific place to help standardize the vision of the command post, and having the ability to run everything smooth and precise as it should. I know when units came here, some of it was like we'd be sitting there with them and be like, oh, have you looked at, you know, setting it up this way to make it more efficient?
Yeah, I think so. The Mark I did not have that kind of flexibility that you just mentioned, sir, mainly because of that SICK-up and the table infrastructure that was placed in the center of that thing. And so, for instance, if you're running a setup like that, the Mark I version, in an austere environment, and you get an NCOM event or indications that IDF is, you know, imminent, then you basically have to abandon that center infrastructure to get folks out of there in a rapid or expedient manner. So I think when we looked at the Mark I, we thought a lot about staff processes. We looked at things that we don't typically see as successes as OCTs when we bring MCPs or battalion organizations down here inside the box and kind of look at their systems and functions as a staff. And so we tried to look at not only survivability of the footprint, but also how to increase those processes. And I think that's how we ended up with that initial design of having all the tables and the cop in the center. And then once we realized, like, hey, this is good, but it's not mobile enough. It is not discrete enough to mask the fact that this is, in fact, a command node of some sort. So we got rid of the SICUP eventually. And then once we did that, we moved more personnel inside. Now we're looking at a modular system that can, that comes together to form a command node when necessary.
Yeah, that's it. So somewhere along the ways of the when we first started looking at this, we had that article from General Beagle come out, the graveyard of command posts, taking the real life lessons of the Ukrainian conflict and bringing it in. And I remember seeing in that, there was the Russian command vehicle that was hit looked a lot like one of our expandos. And I remember, taking that kind of personally, because as a brigade S3, I operated out of an expando a lot of the times. I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of scary. And then we got some fairly pointed refinements from General Gardner, if I recall, before we transitioned. Do you remember how that went?
Yeah, with the Mark I version, spending 2 weeks building it out, getting the concept that we wanted. He walks in, we go to brief him. First thing, I don't like it, because it was the same. And his thing with it was the same layout when he was a battalion commander.
Yeah, I remember him saying that. He walked in, he said, "This is no different than when I was a battalion commander." And it was a bit of a shock because it was a lot of work. And then Major Jim Lee was still on the team. And I remember talking to him afterwards, and it was just like, okay, I guess we got to relook this thing pretty hard. And so we did. And so then came the Mark II version, I guess. And that is the model we have now, that if you go to our team's room, you'll see pictures, videos, and all kinds of things that show that. And it's a pretty popular design. So First Armor Division worked with it at the division level. 2CR's got a fantastic version that looks just like ours in their C2P2 program. And then in the German CTC, after I talked to their folks, they're doing the exact same model with their armored vehicles, and they're working the same thing. So it's catching on. So I think we realized we had something early on. Flash forward, everybody recognizes it's something. But back then, I think we realized that we had something and it was useful. But it was new, and it took some convincing to bring folks around to get them to come to the gospel. So I want to talk about really the first time we experimented with this thing, the polar bears. So they arrive with expando van, the bear cave, and what we textbook now call legacy command post. And General Anderson at the time, he said, hey, we've seen what you're doing with these command post survivability, like, give us the treatment. And so we did, and we imposed upon them our model, and we even gave them our prototype to use and had them park their expando and their other stuff, and there was a lot of friction there. Do you guys remember that event with the polar bears and trying to get them out of their expando and into our model?
Yes, it started up at live fire, because they did live fire at the front side. And I think what helped gain the trust with our vision with them is when they parked their expando van in a spot they shouldn't have, and had to do like the Austin Powers 100-point turn to get it out. But once there was a lot of friction at the beginning, but then with us helping, given the equipment, given the things, they came, like, by the end of the rotation, they were for it. And things started running smoother, operations were running smoother and all that, because even something mobile, you could still run operations while you're jumping talk too.
Right. Seeing a lot of reps, I can personally attest that some of the, though it feels cozy in there, and there's a false sense of security, a false sense of discipline because you've got, you know, aluminum around you. But Captain Bradley, I wonder if you could add to that. So what are the perils of the Expando just as a piece of kit when it comes to, you know, fighting in JRTC and in LSCO? You know, what does it do to the staff?
Oh, it basically, it does one of two things. It either puts them in a point where they don't know if that particular vehicle is going to be a future operations vehicle or a current operations vehicle. Sometimes it's a degraded mixture of both, or it completely, whichever function that vehicle decides to serve, the other half of the staff operational process is then alienated, right? So we talk about the fact that the Polar Bears had the Expando, which they used as a current operations vehicle. They had the foresight to make that distinction early on, but that meant that their plans vehicle was in the backside of an LMTV. And so, you know, when you do that, you can't necessarily attach those vehicles. You can't join those vehicles. And even if you tried to do so, you're just creating a larger signature that can be seen from multiple, you know, hundreds of meters away. So they have to effectively be separate and distinct. But now when you're having, say, you're in the middle of a, you know, large engagement period, you're not synthesizing what's happening in current operations that's going to shape what you need to consider as planning factors or variables in your future operations.
Sure.
So a lot of the staff synchronization and integration that needs to happen, even within warfighting functions, ceases to occur because you've isolated these two elements and separated them across the MCP.
Yeah, 100% on all that, but Sergeant LaPlante, if you have some comments. So from a purely, you know, discipline level, and like we are in large-scale combat, you know, it's been my experience that units that bring the Expando, when they get in there, it's like we're back home again. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got aluminum around you, you've got lights, you got electricity, you got the coffee pot, you got air conditioning, and so they just lose the situational where they lose the reality of it. If it rains, you don't notice. You know, you don't even get to see the stars. Whereas in our model, open air, camo net, you know, even the AS2 has to use red light in a pen, and so your mind is in it. It's focused on the fight, and you're hearing the sounds of the battle. Mm-hmm. You know, you're watching the weather, like, and so you're in it more than when you're in those Expandos. I wonder if you have comments on just discipline and basic soldiering.
Yeah, I mean, with the creature comforts that an Expando van gives you, you kind of get relaxed. You'll get complacent pretty quick, and it might just be a hangout spot where people in there that don't need to be in there just collect an AC and something like that, or be able to at night be able to actually see and not use a red lens. Whereas our model that we provided, you had that, like you said, the open air, free flowing, and but you had to go under red lens at night.
Right.
You had to be able to do certain things. And once you're outside here in lovely Louisiana, whether it be summer or winter, you'll acclimate better to the environment with the open air. Whereas the Expando, you're just soaking up AC.
Right. And it's more,
the discipline kind of goes out the window. You see a more complacency hit sooner than later down the road, especially at the JRTC.
And not to mention, you know, power consumption, mm-hmm. and noise and light. You know, our model is minimal power consumption, minimal class 3 required. You know, there's nobody ever says, hey, the AC broke. You know, and then the fuel consumption is just from a sustainability, and then, you know, and then as we touched on, also just identification from the air. As we put up drones and we tasked drones to go look at these command posts every time we did it, you know, I remember quoting one Geronimo soldier who had seen an Expando out there, and he said, hey, I don't know what that thing is, but it looks important, so I'm calling for fire on it.
And especially with the right camo netting, the right size of the camo netting covering the entirety of it, could help a lot too, you know, and with the thick vegetation as well as a thick canopy will help hide the smaller footprint than a giant expando.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think we've beaten up the expando enough. I'd like to pivot now to where we started seeing success as battalions were bringing our model. You know, so a heavy cell up front, some resistance, but then they saw the light. But then things kind of flipped, didn't they? Then we started to see people arrive already with our model in hand. And the first iteration of that was wild boars. So they came to the table already at what, like an 80% solution? Mm-hmm. So what do you recall as being some of the successes up front or some of the challenges with them now that we had somebody actually showing up with the equipment ready to do it?
So what I remember is not only did they already show up with the equipment, they'd already thought about how they were going to improve upon that model. So a lot of the things that we fabricated, we made out of like wood, they were like, hey, we're going to make this stuff out of metal, right? Because we want it to be durable, we want it to last. And so what I remember from 230 was a lot of the friction that we see from some of the other legacy systems with regard to like staff integration, things of that nature, it didn't exist. When they needed to be mobile, they were fully mobile. They could displace rapidly, in place rapidly. Command and control was less of an issue as far as being able to communicate with subordinate elements and higher elements. I think the only challenges that they did have are those that are inherent to the model itself, i.e. how do we manage the logistics package that kind of supports the MCP? Where does that go, right?
Right.
But they capitalized on a lot of the successes of the model. They had, you know, effective security because they could listen and understand the environment around them. They had, like I said, the staff integration processes. Everyone was always aware of what the everyone had basically situational awareness of what was going on around them, and that's not something that we were used to seeing with legacy systems.
Right. Sergeant LaPlante, Captain Bradley mentioned, the offset of, the radiation, so the STT, and then the supply node. From your fires background, can you comment on why that's important and what you think the challenges with that are for battalions?
Oh yeah, like offsetting, your antenna farm, because from the EW side, that EW can pick up that signature, and then we can kind of put something together, build a targeting packet for it, and hit it, strike on it with, leading with HE, as everyone always says. And then just the noise and light discipline, if you have everything all together, you're going to get a bigger, signature from noise. Whereas if you offset everything, and I know it sucks running long extension cords or power cables or antenna cables, but the success, the upside to that is not being targetable, because you have a smaller signature, right, offset in any variation.
Now, what do we think, and I'm interested in both your perspectives, what do we think that distance is? There's a cost-benefit calculus there, because that easily identifiable C2 piece of equipment, so far forward in the battle, it's obvious what's going on there. There's not rifle platoons dragging around a satellite dish, and so its mere presence indicates a C2 node. So there's got to be a balance between how far away do you do it for the survivability aspect versus how far away do you do it where potentially, if it's seen, it's not associated with the mobile command group or the CP. So from an S2 perspective, Captain Bradley, what do you think about that? What comes to your mind?
Part of me hates that I'm going to give this answer, but I think it's the best answer that actually applies, looking at it from all kinds of formations, not just light and mechanized or whatnot, but I think it's terrain dependent.
That's it. And so, part of what we ended up getting to, and we saw this a lot with the 82nd Airborne, is that perhaps at the front edge of the battle, the battalions don't need to be up on upper TI very often. And so that dish or whatever gives you away is definitely being a C2 node. That should be highly concealed unless necessary. And then given the offset nature of it from, taking into account blast radius and taking into account association, one of the things we discovered as we were working with one Fuhrer looking at, well, what if when we offset things, we put decoys out there? So what if we put our satellite dish, we separate it a little bit, and then we keep with us some extra camo nets and potentially even like some extra poles or whatnot. Obviously it draws some attention, but it's just a thought, and I like to see it go that way because it's some deception, and then we can put out also some signals with that sell it, so that if you're going to get targeted, it at least targets something that doesn't have people with it. But I think that's potentially the next evolution of our model, is not just how to establish and gain SA and execute C2, but how to also next deploy deception, so that if we're being collected on, the enemy focuses on the wrong thing first, and that gives us time to disappear. Yeah, I want to pivot towards our most recent iteration when we had Talon come through. So, in my opinion, the most refined version of our model we've seen yet. We talked to them at Fort Campbell. We went to go see them. We gave them our products. They were all in. They were already doing a lot of our stuff without even knowing that it came from us, at least to a degree. And so they were already there. And I took that as an indicator that the word is getting out, and that at least across the 18th Airborne Corps, units are coming to JRTC, they're getting the experience, they're seeing that it works, they're bringing it home, and it's resulting in a generational change. I haven't seen a big tent within 18th Airborne Corps in years now. We still see them sometimes in some units, and definitely in Alaska where you got to have it. But I take that as an indicator that the word is getting out, and units are starting to change their equipment loadouts at home. What do you guys hope that the future looks like as we see units come through here that are following our model? What are you hoping to see that's different?
I mean, just being the first people to think about it, build it out, and all that. Just over the years, seeing the vast improvements on it for the better. Yeah, you're gonna get some creature comforts or the flavor of that battalion commander inside the MCP, because that's his spot. But it's very rarely that you see a big change of it. It's just little minor improvements here and there, or little minor battalion commander flavor inside the MCP. So as long as we keep seeing it, keep going forward, I believe that's going to be the best part. And then knowing that some of us here at JRTC were the first 12 to think about it.
That we know, at least.
That we know of, yes.
Yeah.
So what I like to see is, I'd like to see more of what they have done as far as putting their own genuine thought into how they actually construct the thing and what happens inside those individual vehicles, right? So I don't want to see more of, hey, this is what, Ops Group JRTC has come up with, so we're going to do exactly this. I like to see units say, okay, hey, we don't have this piece of equipment, but we do have, so we don't have, for instance, intel-wise, we might not have the CD1 yet, but we do have a CPOF. We're going to put the CPOF here, and these are the functions it's going to serve, right? So as units make those substitutions, I like to see them improve on the overall design and how they actually execute their functions within those vehicles and the equipment associated with that.
Yeah, ownership.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's key. Is so what our product, with all of our products readily available on Microsoft Teams, it is a baseline, right? So it's the very ground floor of an idea that we want people to build upon. And so our stuff is near zero cost, but it's the logic of the thing, how it comes together, how the people interact within it. That's what we want. And so what I would love to see is just like you described, is folks out there in the infantry community take our baseline model, look at it and say, well, I could make that better, and oh, that should be metal and this should be fixed or whatever. Awesome. Beautiful. That's it. That's what we wanted. We wanted you to look at it and say, I can do better, and then add to it. But keeping the same logic of, reducing your visual and radio footprint, figuring out ways to disperse things that make you identifiable, potentially employ some deception, and then coming together when necessary to perform a function, and then otherwise dispersing so that you can't be identifiable. So I'd like to see units start coming with their own ownership of it and say like, oh yeah, no, this is our model. We don't know that you guys had anything to do with this, because I think that's success. Because then that means it's changed. We've changed the foundation of what the community thinks is a command post, as more than a tent where people get together. It is when the functions of the command post assemble to perform a purpose. That is the command post. And then even if it's dispersed, it doesn't matter. Like it's beyond a physical location. It's the output of the thing or the assembly of the thing. So I think if we can affect that, then we've done our work and we've helped out, because I have no doubt, it'll result in survivability on the battlefield. The last thing I'll say about this, and I know you guys are passionate about it, is simply fixing the equipment and what it looks like is the easy part, and everybody can do it if they want to. The hard part is the people and systems, and that's where the real work is making sure that what we put in that command post performs the function. Because I truly believe that a command post is just people and systems. Equipment is like extra. It helps you get the word out. But if you can get the right people in the right place with the right systems, and they have the ability to run to A and B, you've got yourself a command post.
Mm-hmm.
You need a map in there. And then you put equipment on top of it, to help you move faster and communicate better. So if units start with the people, train them, pick the right personalities, get them in the right place, then they get the systems, highly polished processes, SOPs, so on and so forth. If we get that right, the equipment just makes them more effective at doing that. And I know you guys have thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, so I know when we initially looked at it, we took our best. Let me re-answer that. So I know when we initially looked at this thing, we kind of made our determination based on what we've observed over past rotations versus what we understand as far as staff roles and responsibilities doctrinally. And we kind of use that to guide our judgment as to, okay, for the blueprint, these are the folks that need to be in these vehicles, understanding that these vehicles have functions within the staff, not necessarily individual warfighting functions, with the exception of maybe fires, right? But even when you look at the fires vehicle inside of our model, it has multiple warfighting functions within it. There's S2 folks in there, there's S3 folks in there, right? And they all contribute to that fires enterprise. And so that was the foundation of that vehicle before we started saying, okay, well, now let's look at what kind of systems do we want in there? What does a fires person need to have? What does the intel person need to have, right? And I think as organizations start to look at and adopt this model, they have to approach it with a similar mindset. They have to say, okay, so if we're limiting ourselves to these maybe 3 to 5 vehicles, right, then we need to make sure that these vehicles serve these functions. And if these functions are to be successful, who within our organization are the personalities that need to be there to make this work, right? And then based on that, they can reallocate those systems. And I think that's how a lot of these organizations are going to achieve success when they bring these MCPs into environments like JRTC, NTC, or a LISCO environment.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly what he said.
What he said, yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah.
In smarter terms than I could have.
Well, that's about. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Crucible JRTC experience. Again, if you want more information on the ideal command post model, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll join our Microsoft Teams page. Join us again next time. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Crucible, the JRTC experience.
The Joint Readiness Training Center is the premier Crucible training experience. We prepare units to fight and win in the most complex environments against world-class opposing forces. We are America's leadership laboratory. Again, we'd like to thank our guests for participating. This podcast was created and produced by Mr. John Mabes. Executive producer is Lieutenant Colonel Drew Zabriskie. It was recorded by Captain Jermaine Branch and edited by Mr. Travis Boyle. Series intros were built by Chief Thomas Rich, and vocals were done by Mr. Robert Chopper. Special thanks to Mr. Jeff England and the Fort Johnson Public Affairs Office. Be sure to like and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest warfighting TTPs learned through the Crucible that is the Joint Readiness Training Center. Follow us by going to https://linktr.ee/JRTC. We'd like to thank our partners at the Center for Army Lessons Learned of the Combined Arms Center, especially the JRTC Call Observations Detachment. Be sure to follow them on social media as well. Follow them at https://www.army.mil/call. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you listen or watch your podcasts, and be sure to stay tuned for more in the near future. The Crucible, the JRTC experience, is a product of the Joint Readiness Training Center.